The companies that don't get veterans are the same companies that treat their labor line item as a cost and not an opportunity.
Hey, got something really cool I wanted to run by and let you know what's going on. So I'm starting a group that will start taking a deep dive into each one of these episodes. So we'll collectively come together and talk about the shows, talk about the guests. I'll be bringing back some of the guests to do some Q&A sessions and really take a further dive into their story, their journey, the episode, talk about, maybe some of the things you wish I would have asked on the episodes, do some Q&A sessions and the like. As a friend put it to me, it's really like a book club, but for the podcast. So a couple times a week, we'll go in, we'll break down the favorite shows of the week, and have cool discussions around everything that we've heard, we've learned, and want to know about their journey. Some of these guests will come in and they'll teach part of, what makes them awesome at what they do. And then, as always, I'll be providing regular value and content in this group. It's really cool because this only is going to cost $5 a month to join this group. And you'll be able to come in, interact with everybody else in there. So I'll put a link right in the show notes for this that you can jump in, come have a conversation with us, and we will really deep dive into each one of these episodes and help us all rise up together. Thanks for tuning in, guys. It's going to be a great show today. Having the show wasn't something I started out to do. But the day I found out somebody wanted to really sponsor the show was a really, really cool experience. So, guys, I want you to take some time to go check out Point Blank Safety Services and their new nonprofit, Blue Family Fund. These guys are doing some really, really cool things. And Stacy McGovern, who's the CEO over there, has been a dear friend, and she was a guest on the show. But these guys are literally taking, the off-duty officers and putting them out in security guard role. And here's what's cool about it is, as they're protecting our lives, they don't make a whole lot of money in that regard. No first responders are paid for the value they provide for our safety and our health and taking care of us. So these guys, Stacy and her team over at Point Blank Safety Services have really found a cool way to give back to these officers by helping them provide an additional income so they can continue to support and protect us. So do me a favor, guys. Seriously, go check out pointblanksafety.com and then go look at their nonprofit, which is Blue Family Fund. Now, this nonprofit was created because of the success of Point Blank Safety Services. They wanted to give back to the families of fallen officers and be able to give scholarships away to the families of current, police officers. So do me a favor. It would mean the world to me if you would go out and help support this show by supporting Point Blank Safety Services and their nonprofit Blue Family Fund. Just tell them Donnie has sent you. You heard it on Donnie Success Champions, and Stacy will take a tremendous and amazing care of you. Thanks, guys. All right, guys, so it'll be a fun episode. I'm bringing another veteran on here, Corey Christman, and he's got a really cool story about how he transitioned out of the Air Force, realized that he wasn't maybe built to work in the civilian sector, jumped out on his own, and they now have this really cool leadership, HR, training, development type company, really working with companies, helping them to understand and groom millennials for the next generation. And we're going to talk about the wine he's got going on that's surrounded around veterans and first responders. So stick around. Going to be a good episode. All right, guys, so another fun episode. I'm bringing another veteran. Well, I'm going to use that term loosely. I'm bringing you an Air Force guy, so you guys know how that goes. But it's Corey Christman. He's got a fun story. He's got a fun journey. So, Corey, welcome to the show, my friend. Please enlighten us with your story.
Hey, thanks a lot, Donnie. I've been following your podcast for a while. Love to see what you're doing. And
oh, sweet! I'm up to a whole one listener now. I love it.
Yeah, that's it. No, where do you want to start, man? I can.
Here's what I like starting with most of my veterans is: are you out or are you still in?
No, I retired in 2012.
All right, cool. So let's start with the transition story.
Sure.
Talk a little bit about your military journey, your Air Force journey. And for those that listen to the show, I know you get a lot of civilians. It's military riffs. We're always going to do it, right? Especially being a Marine because we're the cockiest ones of the bunch. But walk us a little bit through your military ride. Absolutely walk us through the transition story, and then we'll get into where you're into now.
Yeah, that was awesome. So for most of my career, I was a special agent with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and I did a lot of cool things, just like all military members typically do. Iraq and Saudi Arabia and various places. But in my transition began when I retired in February 2012, and during that time frame, that was really the buildup of it was kind of like the beginning of where we are today from a veteran transition standpoint, meaning it was around the 2012 time frame where you got to see a lot of these programs that have, subsequently flourished, like the Institute for Veterans and Military Families and the RWBs and all these other programs. So, but I was in a geographically separated unit, so my transition was a little different than most, meaning that I didn't have a person to kind of guide me through, like an admin or what have you. So it was more or less, I just got an out processing checklist. I went to TAP, and that was it. So I went to TAP, and it was 75% how to do a resume, and then I was fortunate enough to land a job while I was on terminal leave, and worked at that job for a short period of time, and had another corporate job, and just realized the corporate world wasn't for me.
So during your transition, you're sitting at an outward base that's not really attached to a bigger unit. So they don't really have the transition officers in there. I mean, it wouldn't matter if they did. The transition officers suck anyways.
Sure.
The programs are horrible anyways. So you basically have to go through the process all yourself, which is very similar to my story. And I was on Camp Lejeune, which is one of the biggest Marine Corps bases there is. And I went through the whole TAPS program and everything else. And did you feel like you were ready to join the civilian ranks after all those years and become a civilian at that point?
No, I wouldn't go that far. Because I was an OSI agent, we had, our process was a little different to begin with. A lot of our records were masks and all that. So the actual paperwork part of leaving the military was pretty simple. But going from running your own office and leading teams to the civilian sector I severely underestimated the challenges associated with that.
And why do you think that is? Because I think a lot of people, I know I was asked this last week, is, very specifically, people were asking me, like, the World War II veterans came home, they went to work, the Vietnam veterans came home, they got spat on, they went to work. The veterans getting out now, they asked me and said, Donnie, why do you think there's so much more suicide? There's so much more transition problems. Why do you think that is? And, I think two things play into it. One, we had social media now, which we didn't have social media back then. So more of it's made aware of. But I also think so, too, is there's not a proper transition program into play to help people get out. What do you think?
Well, I think since 2012 and maybe even before that time frame, I think we're light years now ahead of where we were back when I separated. My wife runs a company, a veteran services company, and I've been loosely working in the veteran space since I retired. And I can tell you that while it's not perfect, I'm a firm believer that there has been advances. It may not be perfect at the moment, but I've talked to people who've transitioned recently and who have been proactive about their transition and saying, hey, listen, this is tough. Like, I'm going from known to unknown, and I have all these resources, and I don't know which way to go and how to navigate them, but I'm going to jump off and I'm going to take control of it. And a lot of those guys and gals have been successful.
Yeah, I mean, I had Dan Dwyer on the show, and he's one of those guys. He's like, look, I'm retiring, I'm getting out. And he goes, I just wasn't going to, not dive in and figure it out. So Dan tapped into every freaking resource he gets hands on, and his transition's been solid.
Yeah.
And I've talked to the other guys that were more like me, and dude, when I was ready to get out, I'm gone, right?
Yeah.
Get me out of here as quick as possible. So it's guys like me that are struggling, but that puts 100% on the individual, right?
Yeah.
You can't wait for somebody else to give you a hand up. You've got to go get it yourself.
Yeah.
So you jumped out, you got your own job, and are working for a company. You didn't last with that one long. Was it a conflict of how you were in the military and now going civilian, or was it just a job you hated?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me was going from, you're in a strategic level position, meaning I'm setting the tone and the pace for my office. I'm leading teams. I'm responsible for budgets. I'm responsible for executing a mission, quote unquote. And when I went into my first job, it was, how do I pull back in that regard, and how do I become a follower again? For the longest period of time, I had been the one who was leading teams and leading people, and now I'm having to dust off my followership cap. And it was tough because, you like doing things your way, and you get into, this routine. So the first job I had, it was more or less, I just felt underutilized. And so when I went to the second company, there was just poor leadership all the way around. So it was easy to pull, easy to punch out of that job.
And I think it's funny is, I love telling the story that, when I got my first real corporate gig working up in St. Louis, I had a VP tell me, he goes, hey, two things, son. One, lose the country twang and you're not promotable. And the second thing he said was quit telling people you're a veteran because it's not going to help you. Yeah. He wasn't wrong, right? And it took me years to get back and tell that story. But now I have civilian companies that are coming to me. They're like, okay, we want to hire vets. We want to work with them. How do we do them? And the biggest thing that I tell them is I said, point a direction and then get the hell out of the way.
Yeah.
And the civilian world, they're so, they want to be on top of you and control. And I'm like, you can't do that with a veteran, because as soon as they're boxed in, they're going to be out.
Yeah. Well, and what a lot of civilian companies don't realize, and we in my consulting company, we work with a lot of different businesses, from private equity firms all the way down. And what many of them don't realize at the moment is they are very, very vulnerable at the middle-most part of their company. And they're vulnerable because they have baby boomers coming out the top. They've got Gen Z and Gen Z and millennial coming in the bottom. And the millennials, the older millennials and Gen Xers may or may not know how to lead. And what we're able to do is say, hey, listen, you're either going to lead them or they're going to leave, veteran or not. Right. And then the veteran piece are like, I can't tell you how many human resources people have said, well, I don't understand veterans. I said, well, what don't you understand? I said, this isn't a language. This is somebody that if you give them a chance and you give them expectations, they're going to come in, they're going to be an impact player. I said, the people who don't get veterans, the companies that don't get veterans, are the same companies that treat their labor line item as a cost and not an opportunity.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And even bring millennials into the mix. And in the mix, I love it. And I got a friend that she speaks on millennials all over the world. And, I found early on when millennials was like this thing where everybody was bitching and moaning about. And I was right there with them. Like, these kids don't work. And, I was bad-mouthing every bad label out there. And she finally looked at me and she said, Donnie, stop. You can't get mad at this label of millennials. You're not mad at them. You're jealous. I said, what the hell do you mean I'm jealous? And she goes, look, they are some of the most badass workers in the world. They just come to work when they want. They leave when they want, but they get shit done.
Yeah.
And you're mad because your entire career you were the 9-to-5 guy, and you got there on time, and you left at a certain time. You know, they are putting in the same hours. They're doing the same thing. They're just doing it on a different schedule. So shut the F up and, you know, let them do their thing. And it's the same thing for the veterans, right?
Yeah.
It's just about embracing the way, you know, they do things.
Yeah, you first got to be willing to give them a chance, though, and you got to stop buying into all the negative stigma and this and that. I mean, listen, I tell people, you know, CEOs and C-suite people all the time, I said, if you're looking for somebody to come in, I'm not saying you got to give them preferential treatment just because they're a veteran, but at least get them to the interview, right? Like, if you get them to the interview and then feel it out, you know, 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, you've got an impact player who can come in and do various things and can be massively, you know, impactful to your organization.
Yeah, and the only thing that I say to that, and I challenged Patrick Mudge on this when he was on the show because he gave me the same thing, is, you know, companies got to give these guys a chance. Well, no, they don't, right? It's on the veteran themselves to step up their game to get that interview. You're in the same fight with everybody else, and which leads me to say that if you're trying to get a job through a freaking resume, you're playing the wrong game anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you, and you and I are saying the same thing. I think it's absolutely the veteran's responsibility to first understand that the resume is not about them. It's about why their qualifications make them eligible for a role or a position.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that secondly, they've got to perform in the interview, right?
Right.
But what I've come across HR people who have said, you know, we don't know how to do this veteran thing. We're just going to bypass them and go to a civilian.
But that gets into, like, you wouldn't know how to do a race thing, or you wouldn't know how to do a sex thing. You know, I mean, you know, you can't put that out there. You're HR, for Christ's sake.
Yeah. I mean, and you even see it if you follow on LinkedIn. You even see it. So now some of the, you know, the big conglomerates, you know, the Lockheed Martins and the Deloittes and the Booz Hamilton. Now they for the past several years they start to create subsections of veterans. Like, we only want company grade officers, or we only want senior NCOs. Like, they really understand the difference between what a captain does and a senior NCO does.
Right. You know, but that's investing back into the guys that invested a lot for this country. And, you know, I really truly believe that companies need to take a better look at them, not give them a hand up. We're saying the same thing, you know, but God, for the love of God, just like, you know, everybody else has fought to give a career a shot, give them a fair frickin' shot.
Yeah.
You know, I really never understood when I first got out how veterans had become a minority in at least corporate America. And it's just blown me away that that's a thing. Being a white guy in America, I've never been in a minority setting ever in my life. And that's one of the reasons, you know, I ended up in sales. You know, sales will hire anybody. If you got a heartbeat and can talk to people, you know, you can have a sales job.
Yeah, at least for a couple of weeks, right?
Right. Until you suck in sales. So, thank God I was able to stick around for a number of years. Tired of making other people, you know, wealthy.
Yeah.
So you did 2 civilian jobs, and then you jumped out and you started your own company. Walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I just realized that I don't want to say I was unemployable, but I certainly was.
You just did.
Yeah, I was certainly unhappy while I was employed. How about that? The thought process of starting my own company was kind of twofold. One, I've been a winemaker for a number of years, and I'm working on launching a commercial wine brand. So I had this in the back of my mind, and then I hooked up with some guys over in Pittsburgh. I spent part of the time in Western Pennsylvania and part of the time in the wine region in New York State. I've joined this group of people who are much smarter than me, and we really go around and we help companies understand human resources. We use behavioral analytics. You and I have talked about the predictive index in the past. We've messed around with that, but it's really helping these older generation CEOs and executives realize that the number one reason why people are leaving companies right now is poor leadership, right? And this isn't going to get better with time because, as we already talked about previously, millennials are changing jobs about every 6 months until they get an environment that they feel is worth their while, right? So we work with companies. We start at the strategic level. We work in operational and tactical level. And then at the same time, we're growing millennials like crazy. Just how to interface with that boss who doesn't know how to lead.
Right.
You know, there's so many leadership opportunities for veterans. I don't care what your rank was. Impact positions in companies. People have asked me, well, now that I understand this, how do I find more people like you in your company? I said, there's veterans everywhere. I said,
right.
These guys learned this stuff when they were 19 years old,
Well, and one thing I told a company, because I got asked the same thing, they're like, okay, how do you find the movers and shakers out of the veteran community? I'm like, well, why don't you start talking to them before they get the hell out?
Yeah.
They're all on bases somewhere, especially here in Texas where a majority of veterans come from. You got a huge pool of them here that are here. I mean, why don't you send your freaking recruiters out to the freaking bases and start talking to guys?
Yeah.
And get the engagement going beforehand so you can start hand picking, all along the way. I have a theory, and one of my theories is big corporate America is going to go away, at least as the way you see it now. Yeah. Of everybody being in this one massive building, that type of infrastructure, because of the gig economy and because I love how the millennials have changed the game and said, look, we don't want your grandpa's company. What do you guys think of that? Especially since you're going in and you're working with these companies from an HR perspective and everything else. Are you guys having that same thought process that structure's going away, or?
Well, I think I don't know about the structure you mentioned going away, but once we're able, like when you find a company that's squared away from a culture perspective, the things like trust, the things like, the backstabbing and all the drama that I'm sure many of your listeners and you and I have experienced in our life, it's just non-existent, right? So when an employee says, hey boss, I've got to do these 2 things over the next 3 days. You mind if I work from home? There's not even a hesitation, right? Because there are corresponding human resources policies say, hey, listen, we're going to treat you as a professional. We're going to treat you as an adult until you prove otherwise, right? And then if you do act inappropriately, then we're going to drop the hammer on you, right? So those are the companies that it's a professional basis. And if, there's some companies out there right now that don't even have leave policies, or I shouldn't say leave, paid time off policies, right? There's no, it's unlimited, right? There's people that, I've worked with some companies where they've had employees try to take advantage of that, but they're on a small percentage. Well,
and I like that, because I think if you create an environment where people can self-select, they will. But that's not traditional business. Traditional business is this is how everything works. You rank and file. How much pushback are you getting on this? Because you're going into companies and saying, look, put this infrastructure in, with these caveats. Are they immediately like, hell yeah, we're in, or are you getting a pushback?
Well, we don't necessarily get a pushback. Our goal is to go in and first we do a lot of listening, because we're not there to sell per se. We're there to listen and provide solutions and strategy. But an offshoot of that is morale starts to come up and, productivity starts to come up. And next thing you know, they're like, well, how do we keep this, right? How do we don't want this to go away. People are actually walking around smiling instead of giving each other the finger, and so then they start expanding their strategies. They start having focus groups where they bring in employees and say, hey, listen, what are your thoughts on how we can make this a better place to work, right? And through those conversations, they end up having things like, Friday, some companies have like a dress down day on Friday, or other companies say, hey, listen, if you need to work from home, just give us 24 hours notice and we'll try it on a per project basis. So, but I agree with you wholeheartedly. There's other clients we worked with that say, hey, listen, this is where our employees come to work, and this is where they'll continue to come to work.
And those are the companies I think aren't going to have the longest lifespan.
Because we have to round the corner from a human resource, like the traditional human resource process from, identification, recruitment, hiring, retention. It's changing dramatically because, it's almost like the prospective employees are like the buyer, if you will. Like, so it's the buyers are selecting where they're going to go based upon what their best fit is.
Right.
I've said it for years. When you go into an interview, right? If I'm going, you're going to interview me, I'm going to interview you too, right? And people are like, well, that's bad advice. I'm like, well,
no, it's not.
I'm like, why is that bad advice? What if it's not a good place for me to work?
Well, but that comes from the mindset of people that have always taken the job that's right in front of them, right? I'm so desperate for work. If they offer me anything, even if it's $40,000 under what I was expecting to get paid, I'm going to say yes because I got to have a job.
Yeah.
All the way through this. So I know you're big into the predictive index, and you and I have talked about that. Walk us through that a little bit, because I know every time I've taken that report, it pretty much says I'm a bull in a china shop.
Well, in my Air Force career, a lot of what we did, behavioral analytics, whether it was interviewing, whether it was, working on different reports. So I was exposed to a lot of behavioral analysis for many, many years. We also were exposed to various psychological testing and the DISC process. I've probably taken the DISC profile 10 times if I've taken it once.
Yeah, I'd be honest. DISC is one of my favorite ones. Yesterday got to do DISC for 150 students, incoming freshman class for a university, helping them figure out what their curriculum. That was a blast.
Yeah. And so when I hooked up with this team in Pittsburgh, they introduced me to PI, and prior to that I'd taken like Myers-Briggs and Colby and StrengthsFinder.
So for the listeners to know, these are all like personality profiles.
Yeah.
It's the simplest way to put them.
Yeah, all different kind of insights into who we are as people. But when I took the predictive index, I was like, wow, like it takes 5 minutes and you get 2 pages of material. It's pretty easy to understand, and it's pretty easy to help others, because DISC is great. I mean, DISC is comprehensive. Sometimes reports get a little lengthy, but nonetheless, it's an insight into how we are as humans. And I think that's, if the companies and the CEOs, if they're willing to first have some introspection and some self-awareness, that's key, because it's tough to do, but it's once they do that, you can kind of open the door and great things can happen. So now, we administer the PI, we get some results, and then we can go in and say, hey, listen, the reason why your chief operations officer does A, B, and C is because you're doing D, E, and F, right?
Right.
If you would approach that COO a little differently and you can focus on these, you're going to get the result that you're looking for. And then we scale it across the organization, and that's how we take a group of people and make them a culture.
Right. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Are you using all of these in predictive index with all the clients and companies you're working with, or? Yeah,
we have a suite of tools. We use predictive index. We use DISC. We have some other tools. We're also doing training. We're spending a lot of time working with companies who are having quote unquote issues with millennials, and they're really not issues. It's 9 out of 10 of them. It's their own self-awareness that they have.
Yeah, 100%.
It's usually what you and I would call an assessment. Hey, where are you? Where do you want to go? What are the gaps? And then we triage, We're meant to get in and get out. If you need us long term, we can be there, but that's really, if we're not generating results, we're wasting your time and we're wasting your money. You know? So our goal is to be as agile as we can.
And I love the fact that you recognize that it's a leadership problem, because anytime you put a blanket over where I just can't work with insert whatever, that's on you. If it's a one-off personnel issue, I mean, that might be a little bit different, but Anytime it's a collective statement, that's you, not them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And what, kind of what I've got some questions, like an assessment some questions that I asked just to kind of see where some of my military career coming back, but just to see where the mindset is of the executive I'm dealing with. You treat I mentioned this earlier, you treat your labor cost as a cost. What if we flip that and we start looking at labor as an investment? You start looking at it as an opportunity. Yeah, you get some smirks, you get some, what the hell are you talking about type of thing, right? But we have to get them to see, like, listen, man, people are leaving companies in droves, and it's all about because you don't understand them, you don't know how to treat them, and more importantly, they don't think you care.
Right.
And if you start caring, that's going to be half the battle.
Well, Richard Branson says it best, and he's like, people tell him all the time, what if I train my employees and leave? And he's like, well, what if you don't train them and they stay?
Absolutely.
I mean, and, I'm biased. I spent the last almost 8 years of my career in a sales training company, so I'm a training guy, but I also know that if you give your people the right tools, the right asset, the right skill set, dude, you'll crush it with your business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where it starts and where we're able to add the most value with the PI stuff is by, you've heard it as a sales guy and a sales trainer, you've heard it all the time. Well, anybody can be a salesperson, right? Like we're all salespeople, right? And I understand the premise behind that statement. It looks great on a sign in an office, but as a sales guy, how many people can actually sell stuff, right?
And this always surprises people. And I love this question because I'll tell people that if you put 100 people in a room, I'll show you 2 real salespeople.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, growing up for me, people were like, Donnie, you can talk to people. You don't know what a stranger is. That you should get into sales. Later in life, I started telling people to quit telling people that sales is so much more than being able to have a flipping conversation. It's a skill set.
We go into sales companies and we work with a lot of sales companies, and usually what we see is they don't have the right behavioral set in either an inside or an outside role, or in many cases they have the inside and outside people flipped based upon what their natural strengths are. So
well, here's a good one you can borrow, and I use this all the time when I was doing sales training. I said, do you want to know if you've got the right players on your team from a sales force? And the CEO was like, yeah. How do I know? And I said, it's really simple. Pretend 2008 happened right now.
Sure.
Could your team pull you out? And you watch this CEO go white, Because they know that they don't have the guys or gals, I'm using that universally, that can pull them out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the sales landscape is changing massively.
Tremendously.
And I feel saddened by these people that don't recognize that relationship. I don't care like what sales training you go to. There's many out there that are wonderful, and I'm sure yours were even better. But if you can't
it sucked. It was horrible.
Well, if you can't relate to people, right? If you can't relate to people, then you're in trouble, right? Because people say, well, I can email market, I can telephone market. Okay, the same technology that allows that today is going to severely limit that in the future, right? That's why people like Frank Kern and the direct sales guys and gals are killing it right now, because people are tired of emails and they're tired of phone calls.
Yep.
So the sales professional today better put the script down, if they have one, and really begin to hone their interpersonal skills.
Well, and here's an interesting thing is I've stepped foot on both sides of the sales spectrum. When I first got into sales, in the late 90s, it was wild because it was straight hammering the phones, kicking in doors. You better be shaking trees to get deals done. And then flash and move forward a couple of years till it became a heavy networking game that if you weren't out networking and getting to know people, you were screwed. And then it evolved into this social game where you've got to be able to play the social, interact, and get to know people with LinkedIn and all this stuff. Here's the one caveat, and you've already said it, that goes across that whole spectrum. That will never change. if you can't form a flipping relationship, right, you've got nothing in sales.
Yeah.
My wife works for a vet clinic, and I love it. She gets all these salespeople all the time come through, and she manages the whole front desk, right? And, you know, she's like, you can tell these guys that have never been told how to sell anything, but they come in, they try and flirt, this, that, and the other. And she's like, if these guys would just walk in and say, hey, here's my information. I'll see you in 30 days. I've got to come back anyways. I know you're busy. You do that 2 or 3 times. By the 3rd, 4th time, the girl's going to start going, hey, good to see you again, right? Because you know how to form a relationship. But I digress.
No, I mean, it's put the shoehorn away, right? Stop trying to shoehorn your product or service in there and build the relationship. And you'll find that relationship will pay for itself over time, right? But the people who are the people who are good at sales have no patience, right? Me, guys who sell stuff, you know, we want it to happen like now.
You take a bunch of, you know, guys like us, and you're like, okay, right, I need you to go out and meet 20 new people, right, form relationships. Oh, by the way, make sure your social stuff is updated. You're like, what the hell?
Yeah, I just want to sell something.
Yeah, just let me go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this is awesome, dude. So where's all this stuff taking you? You're doing all those cool things in the HR arena. I know you're active in the veteran communities as well. Where's all this taking you? Just the future rock star of America, or?
Well, you know, I just partnered with a guy. His name is Eric Guy, so he is a guy.
You bet.
But
a guy.
Yeah, that's it. I just partnered. He has a company called the Center for Victory, and he is a therapist by trade. However, if you met him, you'd never know it, right? And we are really going out and developing programs. There'll be some brick and mortar type programs initially, but more or less it's going to be all either in person or webinar type programs that are can be consumed either by executives who are wanting to have the no kidding approach to how to grow their culture, or more importantly, millennials and Gen Z who are like, listen, I want to figure this out. Nobody's willing to take time to help me with this. If you're willing to take time, I'm willing to listen, right? So those are some things that we're working on. Me personally, I'm actually in the winery that I'm partnered with is just next door. Actually, I was working in the winery this morning, so we're in the process of getting our label online. So once that comes online, it'll be a veteran and first responder focused wine label where we'll actually raise money for veteran and first responder causes, primarily focusing on mental health awareness. That's something
I'm buying one of the first bottles.
Well,
let me know what I thought. Well, what I love about the wine thing is you transition, you get into wine, then now you go to work for HR, so you have a reason to drink wine.
That's it. That's it. Well, one's got to pay for the other, right?
Right.
Unless you're in Napa or Sonoma, there's no money in the wine business usually.
No.
You have to pay for your stuff and have to put gas in the tractor and do it all again next year. So
nice. What's the name of the label?
We're still working on it right now, but the company I'm working with, kind of partnership with, is called Anthony Road Wine Company.
Okay.
It's up in the Finger Lakes in New York. Most people don't know this, but the wine region in New York State is one of the oldest wine regions in our country. But obviously, it takes a backseat to places like Napa and Sonoma.
Right. Well, even in Texas. Texas has got some good wine.
Yeah.
If you try and tell a Californian that, they're like, I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
You're like, yeah, they don't make wine in Texas. Yeah, right, whatever.
I've got a couple here that I do some coaching with on the side that have opened up a Texas wine distribution company. So they go represent all the local wineries, trying to get it to all the restaurants and stuff.
Yeah.
Dude, they've got their hands on some killer wines. Stuff you've never heard of because, of course, it's, the little mom and pop wineries, but.
Yeah, we'll have to chat. I hooked up with a lady her and her husband had a wine distribution company. She works at USAA there in San Antonio, but I think she recently sold it to her brother. But like the number 4th or 5th wine distribution company in Texas. So I guess that probably says something as big as Texas is. So.
Yeah. I mean, people don't always realize, and I love to tell this, that, I mean, it's a 12-hour drive to get across our state.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding.
So that's awesome, dude. I'm glad to see you doing it, especially a wine centered around the first responders and veterans and stuff. That's just a cool thing. And you're going to stay in the HR game, I'm assuming.
Yeah, the HR, we spend more time in the C-suite than we do HR stuff, but the human leadership, human performance stuff, I think there's no end to that. I think there's many people who are in the coaching and leadership game, and we kind of do that, but we kind of do it more at the company level or the organizational level.
Well, at least it sounds like you're a coach that makes money, unlike most coaches I run into. Wait, was that the out loud voice?
Well, I don't know. I make enough money to spend it on other things. So
wine, of course.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't. I vowed that once I left that second job that I'd only do things that I wanted to do and I was happy doing. And so people have said, well, you kind of live life on your terms. I said, I guess if that's what you call it, I guess that's
it is what it is.
So I mean, I'm having fun, and I met a lot of great veterans, a lot of great people who were just wildly successful, and some of the groups that we're a part of, it just amazes me to see, all the people that are just killing it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. It's awesome. Well, dude, I got to tell you, it's been awesome having you on the show. Let's wrap it up this way. It's how I love to wrap up every show, and I know you've listened to a couple episodes. But sure. If you're going to leave our listeners with a phrase, a motto, a slogan, a mantra, quote, something they can carry with them on their journey, especially if they're stacked up against it going through it, what would you say, in that time of need to pull out and remember this?
Wow. Man,
no pressure.
I got to try to be succinct here too. I would say that, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, or a business ownership standpoint, it's never as hard as you think it is. And there's always a reason why not, right? There's always a reason why, you can't or you shouldn't, but we only get one go at this, right?
Yep.
If you're educated and if you've done the work and if you've done the research, get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? There's nothing easy about the business you're in or the business I'm in, but the alternative is driving a desk. Right? Who the hell wants to do that?
Exactly right. So, Corey, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your story, man. Thanks for continuing to be a supporter of the show and some of the things I do as well, man. I really appreciate it.
All right. Take care, man.
Guys, really thank you for listening to this episode. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun putting these together. I wanted to make sure before we get out of here that you knew what we were doing with social content. What we found was because of the podcast, we have a unique way of helping you get your social content out on a very easy way. What we're doing is we're interviewing people. And from that interview, we will capture a lot of information that will then be turned into videos, memes, articles, all things you can use for your social content. I know, like for me, one of the biggest struggles I had was, what do I put out there? What do I say on a regular basis? Well, we'll help do all that for you. So if this is at all of interest to you, reach out to us and let us help you grow your social media channel. I can tell you I did this for my business, and my social media is completely taking off. My Instagram, since I started doing this, jumped to over 10,000 followers, and it continues to grow. So if this is at all of interest to you, check the bottom of the show notes for the link that says, Get My Social Content Done right now.